Hello, this is Shmuel Moshe, and you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast, the weekly Torah portion podcast where I read the weekly Torah portion, then provide my own interpretation of what I think it all means. This week's portion is Vezot HaBerachah. It is the last of all Torah portions. We have made it to the grand finale of the year. We'll be starting in chapter 33 of Devarim. The meaning of this week's portion means, and this is the blessing. So let's get right on into it. As always, you can follow along in English on Chabad.org, and as always, I'd like to remind everybody I'm not a professional Torah scholar, just somebody who wanted to study the Torah. This week's portion falls on the 23rd of Tishrei, 5785, the 25th of October, 2024. First portion, chapter 33, verse 1. And this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel just before his death. He said, The Lord came from Sinai and shone forth from Seir to them. He appeared from Mount Paran and came with some of the holy myriads. From his right hand was a fiery law for them. Indeed, you showed love for peoples. All his holy ones are in your hand, for they let themselves be centered at your feet, bearing your utterances. The Torah that Moses commanded us is a legacy for the congregation of Jacob. And he was king in Jeshurun, whenever the sum total of the people were gathered, and the tribes of Israel were together. May Reuben live and not die, and may his people be counted in the number. May this also be for Judah. And he, Moses said, O Lord, hearken to Judah's voice, and bring him to his people. May his hand do battle for him, and may you be a help against his adversaries. End of the first portion. So, right off the bat, we are now into our final farewell address. I've said this a few times over the last few weeks, but this is truly the grand final speech. He is giving a final blessing not just to the people Israel as a whole, but also now specific tribes for their own individual blessings. So we start off with, of course, Reuben. And remember, he is the firstborn house of Jacob. So there is significance there, but also worth remembering that even though he is the firstborn, it was Joseph, not Reuben, who was the most favored, and also his sons who received the direct blessings from their grandfather. So, interesting, Reuben still gets this first blessing, and also remember that he and his tribe live outside of the Promised Land, outside of the border of the Jordan. Instead, him and the tribe of Gad, as well as half of Manasseh, live out there. Next up for Judah. So, there's been a lot of significance, and you could bring up the historical relevance of the tribe of Judah because that is where King David comes from. So, these are considered to be precepts that give context for why David's line comes from the house of Judah, why the eternal dynasty of David comes from this particular son. So he's listed second after Reuben. So the original blessing, the firstborn, then followed by the one who seems to have some sort of chosen heritage that will follow. So once again, hearken to Judah's voice, bring him to his people, may his hands do battle for him, and may you be a help against his adversaries. Again, looking at the Psalms that are not in this Torah, but written later by David, there is a great deal of overlap in the language there. Now moving on to the second portion. Second portion, Devarim, chapter 33. And of Levi he said, Your Tumim and Urim belong to your pious man, whom you tested at Massah, and whom you tried at the waters of Meribah, who said of his father and his mother, I do not see him. Neither did he recognize his brothers, nor did he know his children, for they observed your word and kept your covenant. They shall teach your ordinances to Jacob, and your Torah to Israel. They shall place incense before you, and burnt offerings upon your altar. May the Lord bless his army favorably, accept the work of his hands. Strike the loins of those who rise up against him, and his enemies, so that they will not recover. And of Benjamin he said, The Lord's beloved one shall dwell securely beside him. He protects him all day long, and he dwells between his shoulders. End of the second portion. So here we now have a few other blessings. These are for the tribe of Levi, as well as the tribe of Benjamin. So first, the allotment, right? So we've gone over first the firstborn, Reuben. Then we have the tribe of Judah. Now we're talking about the Levites, whose basically task is to live amongst all the people. So they come up third here. So this also, in terms of who deserves the most honor and respect, reading into the lineage here. So even though Reuben, during his lifetime, had issues with his father, they obviously had disagreements, and there were times where things went wrong, he still receives the blessing first. And in a way, this almost, to me, when I think about all of the different times throughout before this, it was not the firstborn receiving due blessing. So it's like in this final speech, Moses is the one righting this very serious wrong of blessing the firstborn house of Israel. Now, moving on from there, then we have the house of the king, the future king dynasty. And now third, we have the house of the priests, who will be serving all the people. This is also the tribe that Moses himself comes from. He is a Levite. So why is it that they come third? So again, the humble one that he is, remembering this is now their role. Their job is going to be to teach the ordinances to Jacob and the Torah to Israel. So I think that's kind of very significant, right? So who is Jacob? Who is Israel? They're both the same man, but one, after receiving the blessing, is his new name, Israel. So why do it in that way? So the ordinances and the Torah, in a way, you're kind of associating what seem to be taught practices to be passed down, and perhaps you could call this the oral tradition, or you could simply refer to it as the actual methodology, which I think is a bit more accurate, because these priests have been told exactly what to do, but they're going to learn from their predecessors who will then pass them on through the generations. So what is not written in the Torah will be theirs to keep and manage and oversee. Now, as for the Torah itself, that will be taught to the people Israel as a whole, and so that is where the distinction comes into play. But nonetheless, both are very important. Lastly, Benjamin. So this is one of Joseph's his only direct sibling, and favored by his father the most, Joseph and Benjamin. We also know that a king will come from this tribe as well. But it's interesting that Benjamin receives this blessing next after the Levites. Again, significant is the order. The Lord's beloved one shall dwell securely beside him. He protects him all day long, and he dwells between his shoulders. All right. Now moving on to the third portion, chapter 33, Devarim. And of Joseph he said, his land shall be blessed by the Lord, with the sweetness of the heavens with dew, and with the deep that lies below, and with the sweetness of the produce of the sun, and with the sweetness of the moon's yield, and with the crops of early mountains, and with the sweetness of perennial hills, and with the sweetness of the land and its fullness, and through the contentment of the one who dwells in the thorn bush, may it come upon Joseph's head and upon the crown of the one separated from his brothers. To his firstborn ox is given glory. His horns are the horns of a ram. With them he will gore peoples together throughout all the ends of the earth. These are the myriads of Ephraim, and these are the thousands of Manasseh. All right, that's the end of the third portion. So now we get straight into Joseph. I was just talking about Joseph a moment ago. After Benjamin, these are the blessings for Joseph given to his sons at the end of it. So specifically, this blessing is given to Joseph, yet his sons are often the ones who replace him in the listing of the different tribes. Now we see that this blessing applies to both of his children. But what I also think is very interesting is with them he will gore peoples together throughout all the ends of the earth. So the one who's separated from his brothers, we can read this in a broader context. Joseph experienced what it meant to be cast away from his people, from his siblings, from his immediate tribe under Jacob, and instead lived in exile alone in prison, rose through the ranks, becoming a high-ranking official in Egypt, and through him, well, in the end, he ended up bringing glory to his people and to the nation that he lived in, right? So what is the significance behind that? I would say that this is a sort of heads up, an alert for those displaced peoples who belong to Bnei Israel but are separated from them. They could be exiles. They could be those who do not know their own heritage. This could be a calling for all of those who do not belong to a particular tribe at the time because of this lack of knowledge to be blessed nonetheless, regardless of where they are. And it says, his firstborn ox will be given glory, and so on. So, goring the peoples together throughout all the ends of the earth. To say gore peoples together is also rather, that's a rather violent statement. I mean, again, it's the horns are going to gore the people. So, again, a goring bull is stabbing someone with its horns. So it could also just be a blessing of warfare across the world if necessary. Either way, I'm giving those two different interpretations of what that's really about. I think the latter explanation probably makes a little more sense in the context of goring peoples together throughout all the ends of the earth. So something to reflect over. And again, this applies to the myriads of Ephraim and the thousands of Manasseh. So the two brothers, their blessings, if we recall directly from Jacob, were separate. One blessed before the other, the youngest receiving the greater blessing, despite Joseph's personal want. And I think also this is the significance of Moses going to Reuben first, and again, righting the wrong, showing us that even if you have a favorite, there's a certain order of things that must be followed. And so let him be the one to show that in the final ultimate blessing being given out to the people, remember who gets blessed in what order is based on the way it should be according to the teachings of God. Now moving on to the fourth portion, chapter 33, verse 18 of Devarim. And to Zebulun he said, Rejoice, Zebulun, in your departure, and Issachar in your tents. They will call peoples to the mountain. There they will offer up righteous sacrifices, for they will be nourished by the abundance of the seas, and by the treasures hidden in the sand. And of Gad he said, Blessed is he who grants expanse to Gad. He dwells like a lion, tearing the arm of his prey together with the head. He saw the first portion for himself, because there the portion of the lawgiver is hidden. And he came at the head of the people, he did what is righteous for the Lord, and what is lawful with Israel. So here we have at the end of the fourth portion, this is for Zebulun and Issachar, these two of the 12 tribes. They will be dwelling in these places in the mountain. They're going to have righteous sacrifices, nourished by basically all the things of the seas are going to feed them and keep them well, and also they're going to find things in the sand that they will be able to convert into their own successes from there. Gad, remember, was the other tribe that chose to settle outside of the Jordan, and so, interestingly, he saw the first portion for himself, because there the portion of the lawgiver is hidden. Right, so again, referring to when the people of Gad as well as the people of Reuben requested to be given that land that's good for grazing. So here we have an example of what makes him special. And he came at the head of the people. He did what is righteous for the Lord and what is lawful with Israel. This meaning they saw what was theirs that they wanted. They claimed it, but they still honored their deal, which was to march with Israel and help them conquer the land before going to claim it. So I believe that's what this is referring to. He came at the head of the people, so in other words, they helped lead the charge on the war, did what is righteous for the Lord and what is lawful with Israel. So they followed what they were told what to do. They honored God by going forth to fulfill their deal of the bargain before getting to settle in. Now on to the fifth portion, chapter 33, verse 22 of Devarim. And of Dan he said, Dan is a young lion streaming from Bashan. And of Naphtali he said, Naphtali is favorably satisfied and full of the Lord's blessing. Possess the sea in the south. And of Asher he said, May Asher be blessed with sons. He will be pleasing to his brothers, and immerse his foot in oil. Your locks are iron and copper, and the days of your old age will be like the days of your youth. Jeshurun, there is none like God. He who rides the heavens is at your assistance, and with his majesty he rides the skies. End of the fifth portion. Here we now have the blessings for Dan, Naphtali, and Asher. So, saying Dan is a young lion streaming from Bashan, this is basically just talking of vigor. A young lion is one who they basically run the show, streaming from Bashan, right? So that's a place that they, Og of Bashan was the king that they defeated. And Naphtali, favorably satisfied and full of the Lord's blessing, possess the sea and the south. So once again, another seaside tribe who will take great providence from that ocean and the southern territory. May Asher be blessed with sons. He'll be pleasing to his brothers, immerse his foot in oil. So I think it is fair to say that immersing his foot in oil may be an indication that they will have great olive harvests in their territory, but also being blessed with sons. Oil is necessary for anointing. It's a very sacred ritual, and so the idea immersing his foot in oil may be referring to the fact that, just like the idea of a land of milk and honey means that the land is so bounteous with these things that there will be milk and honey available to everybody. Immersing your foot in oil means you walk around, and just by taking one step, you're already walking in the oil because everything that you need is already there. So I'm going to assume this has to do with some sort of bounty of olive trees being in that region. And also pleasing to his brothers, so it means that the other tribes will all be blessed with sons. He will be pleasing to his brothers. So the sons, first off, having sons means you have heirs that can carry on the name, which is very significant. And then also pleasing to his brothers means that he will be at peace with or be liked by the other tribes. And again, I mentioned the oil thing quite extensively. Your locks are iron and copper, and the days of your old age will be like the days of your youth. So I think the idea here with locks, iron, and copper, this is a little tricky because the English word is unfortunately what I'm using here. So maybe if I take a quick look and see what the translation of that word is specifically. So I think it's, let's see, let's go ahead and take a quick gander at the translation of that word. Okay, so at a glance, it looks like locks does indeed refer to the lock fixture or bars, something to that effect. So I want to make sure I clarified that before I interpreted it. So this meaning that they are iron and copper, as that is to say that what is yours is secure. That iron and copper will be something that you are blessed with because you have so much of it, you're able to forge with it. So that's kind of the idea here. What is yours, you will basically having like locks that are secure with iron and copper. And the days of your old age will be like the days of your youth, meaning even as they get older, they're going to still be young and healthy and vigorous. So often what happens is when people get older, right, they sort of slow down. Maybe they don't have the right energy. But then once in a while, you'll see people who, regardless of how old they are, they still have youthful energy. They still have the spirit of a young person. And so this is a blessing for the tribe of Asher to have that very quality. And then finally, conclusion there, Jeshurun, there is none like God. He who rides the heavens is at your assistance, and with his majesty he rides the skies. So once again, just an overall affirmation of the power of the Almighty. Now moving on to the sixth portion, chapter 33, verse 27 of Devarim. Which are the abode for the God who precedes all, and below are the mighty ones of the world. He expelled the enemy from before you and said, Destroy. And Israel dwelled safely and alone as Jacob blessed them in a land of grain and wine. Also their heavens will drip dew. Fortunate are you, O Israel. Who is like you, O people whose salvation is through the Lord, the shield who helps you, your majestic sword. Your enemies will lie to you, but you will tread upon their heights. Chapter 34, verse 1. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of the summit facing Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, the Gilead until Dan, and all the land of Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah until the western sea, and the south and the plain, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees until Zoar. And the Lord said to him, This is the land I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there, in the land of Moab, by the mouth of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley, in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. And no person knows the place of his burial unto this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes had not dimmed, nor had he lost his natural freshness. And the sons of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. And the days of weeping over the mourning for Moses came to an end. And Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands upon him. And the children of Israel obeyed him, and they did as the Lord had commanded Moses. And there was no other prophet who arose in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew, face to face, as manifested by all the signs and wonders which the Lord had sent him to perform in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and all his servants, and to all his land, and all the strong hand and all the great awe which Moses performed before the eyes of all Israel. End of the 6th portion. So here we have the final words of Moses, his final farewell, glorifying God one last time, and calling out a blessing to the people, saying, "Who is as lucky as you to have this God who is your sword and your shield? Your enemies will try, but they will fail. Why? Because you have this all-powerful God, the greatest of all, behind you." Following this, in chapter 34, Moses goes to where he was told to go for his final farewell. And just as promised, he is shown the entirety of the land that he has led the people to. He sees it for himself with his own eyes, but as is said, the final words that Moses will hear, "This is the land I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." And at the end of this, does Moses die? Alone. Nobody knows where he fell. Nobody knows where his life ended. They have a loose idea. We know that it was in the land of Moab by the mouth of the Lord. In other words, he died on God's command, by the promise that God had made to him, that you will see it, but you shall not go there. You will die, just as your brother did. So interestingly, this location opposite Beth Peor in the land of Moab, it says no one knows the place of his burial unto this day. This is hugely significant, and it's extremely important for a lot of reasons. I'm going to use historical context for this. So in the religious discipline that is taught through Judaism, through the Torah, it's extremely dangerous to be mindful of the risks of people turning to idolatry and the worship of anything. It is warned explicitly, you will not worship the stars, the sun, the moon, none of that. You're not going to worship animals. You're not going to worship anything from the sea or from the land. Don't engrave in some kind of image. Don't worship these things. And also, don't worship people. That ultimately, anything that is of this world. Well, Moses is such a figure who, after you've seen this people from time after time constantly stray away from the path, which of them could possibly all say, not a single one of them would ever think, let's go to Moses' grave and start worshiping? The danger of having such a holy and powerful individual known to his location of burial known to all is extremely dangerous for this tribe, for this nation who knows something like idolatry, where it is a normal practice. Furthermore, his body was so sanctified by his constant contact with the divine that for him to be accessible to average people was frankly also just too sacred to be allowed to happen. Could not be permitted. Now, historically, I mentioned I'd give a historical context for this. The great Khan of the Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan, the one who is responsible for so much of the glory that was the Mongolian Empire, he also was buried in a similar fashion. When his life came to an end and he died, he had his people bring his body to an undisclosed location, and there he was buried. Then when those people came back, they were killed so that they could never tell anybody where they buried him. This is a very, very similar situation, at least by the sound of it. Another historical example, Julius Caesar. Caesar is very well known for being assassinated by all of the senators, and indeed it is very well glorified by works like Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. But what they don't often talk about or remember is the significance of what the plan was for what to do with Caesar's body. What did happen was that Caesar was murdered. What they wanted to happen was to then take his body and throw it into the river so that nobody would be able to visit him in a burial site and mourn him. This did not work out for them. When Caesar was killed, they ended up not being able to secure the body. And so what happened was a massive funeral that lasted several days, if not weeks, for all of the many people working and serving under Caesar. All the members of the Roman Republic who loved him from all the different provinces were coming to pay their respects. Interestingly, as a side anecdote, a number of Jews among them from Judea. But in any case, what is the significance of that? They wanted to destroy his body in such a way that nobody could come and mourn for him or glorify him at his burial site. Rolling it back now to our context, when we talk about Julius Caesar, we talk about Genghis Khan. Moses is much the same, a figure who is of such significance that to know the location of his burial is a threat to all mankind, let alone the people of Israel, who have time and again gone so far as to sacrilege, disobey, stray from God. This people who God has made clear are definitely going to stray once again. Well, wouldn't it be a terrible thing if when things all went bad, they said, let's go find Moses' body and try to do something there so that we can channel his spiritual energy? Or what if they said something even worse, like, let's go get Moses' body and take it? This is a really significant last step historically, but the Cave of the Patriarchs is a very sacred place in the land of Israel. It is still there today, and it is where Abraham and his descendants are supposedly buried, right? So it's talked about in Genesis. He bought the land, and that is where he, his wife, and so on have been interned. So what is the significance of that? Well, we know that this is the case. We know that this location still exists today, and we know that various groups have traded hands over who runs Israel, the land of Israel. It's gone back and forth a few times, but during the Crusades, there was a time period where, under Christian rule, the Cave of Machpelah was ransacked to an extent by pilgrims who found bones and took them as souvenirs. Can you imagine this happening to Moses? This can't be. The significance of Moses himself and what his flesh had been exposed to spiritually, that this man was so radiant that he had to wear a veil over his face because it was blinding after being exposed to God. That man cannot be left in a normally marked grave. He can't be someplace that people can go and find him. This is a very dangerous scenario. And if we hear what people have done to our ancestral heritage with the cave where Abraham is supposedly buried and taking bones from there, what would they do if somebody knew where Moses was? What would an enemy of Israel do trying to get back at the people, but try to go and mess with Moses? Who knows what kind of fury would rain down upon the earth to do this to God's right-hand man, his main top guy, the one and only Moshe Rabbeinu. Can't happen. So, with all that explained, we have the explanation that in his burial alone, he was buried by God directly. He buried his friend, we could even call him. He was his servant, but really their relationship was very special. So God buries Moses himself, and we know the approximate area, but not the exact location. He died at 120 years old, with his eyes not dimmed, nor having lost his natural freshness. So in other words, he wasn't like a decaying old person. He was vigorous and healthy, but it was time for his life to come to a close. And indeed, 120 years is the cap given to us in the Torah. The people of Israel all weep for 30 days, and then they carry on. Joshua takes over, steps into the role, and we get these final 3 verses for Joshua. Of course, now he's been designated the successor. He's walking away with that power to lead the people. These final 3 verses: there was no other prophet who arose in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, as manifested by all the signs and wonders which the Lord has sent him to perform in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and all his servants, and to all his land, and all the strong hand and all the great awe which Moses performed before the eyes of all Israel. In other words, No prophet like Moses. No one who God knew so face to face, literally, that he radiated glowing bright because of it. All the miracles that happened, the signs and wonders, that through Moses God demonstrated his power, that he was real and that he was almighty, before not just Israel, but also to the Egyptians and to everyone else as well. For with a strong hand, great awe, Moses performed before the eyes of Israel. That is our sixth portion, and that is the end of the Torah scroll. So where do we go from here? Seventh portion. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning of God's creation of the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was astonishingly empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water. And God said, Let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and God separated between the light and between the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And it was evening, and it was morning, one day. And God said, Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, and let it be a separation between water and water. And God made the expanse, and it separated between the water that was below the expanse and the water that was above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And it was evening, and it was morning, a second day. And God said, Let the water that is beneath the heavens gather into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, Let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-yielding herbs, and fruit trees, producing fruit according to its kind, in which its seeds is found, on the earth. And it was so. And the earth gave forth vegetation, seed-yielding herbs, according to its kind, and trees producing fruit in which its seed is found, according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. And it was evening, and it was morning, a third day. And God said, Let there be luminaries in the expanse of the heavens, to separate between the day and between the night, and they shall be for signs and for appointed seasons and for days and years. And they shall be for luminaries in the expanse of the heavens to shed light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great luminaries, the great luminary to rule the day, and the lesser luminary to rule the night, and the stars. And God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to shed light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate between the light and between the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And it was evening, and it was morning, a fourth day. And God said, Let the waters swarm, a swarming of living creatures, and let fowl fly over the earth across the expanse of the heavens. And God created the great sea monsters, and every living creature that crawls, with which the waters swarmed, according to their kind, and every winged fowl according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the fowl multiply upon the earth. And it was evening, and it was morning, a fifth day. And God said, Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kind, cattle and creeping things, and the beasts of the earth according to their kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kind, and the cattle according to their kind, and all the creeping things of the ground according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, so they shall rule over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the heaven, and over the animals, and over all the earth, and over all the creeping things that creep upon the earth. And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the sky, and over all the beasts that tread upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every seed-bearing herb, which is upon the surface of the entire earth. And every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, it will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and to all the fowl of the heavens, and to everything that moves upon the earth, in which there is a living spirit, every green herb to eat. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, And behold, it was very good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the 6th day. Chapter 2, verse 1 of Genesis. Now the heavens and the earth were completed in all their host. And God completed on the 7th day his work for that he did. And he abstained on the 7th day from all his work that he did. And God blessed the 7th day, and he hallowed it, for thereon he abstained from all his work that God created to do. End of the 7th portion. So, following the 6th portion, we end the Torah, we conclude Devarim, and we resume at the very beginning of Genesis, Bereshit, the first portion. This is, of course, because we have completed the Torah scroll. We go all the way around once again. So what is the significance of this loop of reverting back to the beginning? Well, for starters, it's because we want to make sure that we reset after we finish our 52 weeks of reading Torah. But we also want to make sure that in doing so, we know that at the end of the story of Moses, that is the end of the Torah. What do I mean by that? Well, there are other stories and other scriptures that follow. The next is Joshua, and so on. But those are not the laws. The laws, and the precedent for those laws, they come from the Torah. So why did I always say, when I was doing this show, I wanted to study Torah? Because the Torah is the most important document there is. There is no other document that need be relied upon as the absolute authority according to what Moses has taught us. It is through this Torah scroll that God gives his commandments. They have been relayed to the people through Moses and written down by Moses so that all will be able to read them and know them throughout all time. If that is indeed the case, we now know the significance of that. By restarting here, there is a clear cutoff. They could have simply stopped with going into the next book. But the way the portions are broken down, and I don't know whose brilliance this was, but it is established by looping back around. That is where the Torah comes to a conclusion. That is where the laws come to a conclusion. The Torah is the law. That is what it is. I think that's even what it means. So don't look to other sources. You have your own reasons. I know there are various other documents, but nothing is more important than the Torah. There is nothing more important than the Torah for the heritage and the history, as well as the laws and commandments. It is with this Torah that people are empowered to serve God according to his will, according to what is said to Moses, and through this legacy that is passed down. The significance of things like the heritage. It starts all the way back with Genesis, understanding why man fell from grace, and then why it needed to go to Abraham to be the chosen emissary and ambassador for the Most High God, because mankind had fallen and fallen and fallen. Why there needed to be a flood and a great reset. Why? So people know the origin. It could have simply started with a story about Abraham. It could have just started with Moses. We could technically just simply begin with Moses being an Egyptian prince who gets an awakening with a bush in the desert, and you would be good enough to go from there, but we're missing all of the background on these individuals for whom the rest are going to follow. Everything following this, scripture-wise, is valuable. It's important for knowing the historical context for what allegedly occurs, but as far as the law is concerned, my takeaway, my study of Torah tells me this Torah scroll is the law. No other way around. You can argue all you want. People will twist words, but this is the law. And you either follow it or you don't. That is your choice. But don't let anybody else tell you what the real law is. Moses has taught us this is the law. There is no other. Do not let the rules and teachings of man steer you away from honoring the Almighty. And if you are a Jew or a Hebrew or one who follows a son of Abraham, do not turn away from this Torah. This is your lifeblood. Without this, you are hopeless in the dark. Through this, you may find the answers. Thus concludes this year's reading of the Weekly Parashahcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you've been listening all the way since episode 1, thank you so much for being a supportive listener. I'm truly grateful. I often have said to others, I don't advertise this show, nor do I plan to in any extreme capacity at this time, because it is meant to be for those who want to listen, not for those who it's being pushed onto. You have to want it, and that's why I treat it the way I do. If you happen upon it and choose to listen, well, I'm glad that you're here for the ride and that we're learning together. But that's it for now. Until next time, whenever that may be, I bid you all a most wonderful, wonderful day forward. But also to remember, not just through Yom Kippur, but all days, no matter when you are listening to this, the Torah is our given law from Moses. And if you wish to walk in the path, this is the only document you must turn to for your absolute truth. Torah is truth. Adonai Elohechem emet. Hashem is truth. God is truth. I'm going that far. Now we know this is the word of God given to Moses, written for man. Revere it, love it, know it, practice it, preach it, whatever you got to do. But it will get you further in life. For the sake of heaven, turn to this Torah scroll. Even if you falter, get right back on that horse and try again. Baruch Hashem. I've said it so many times. I've ended every episode with that statement. But now I say it once again, as I'll wrap up for the last time for this full reading of the Torah. This has been Shmuel Moshe with the Weekly Parashahcast. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, Baruch Hashem.